It started with a scream that no one heard. A moment swallowed by the cold Sierra night. 5 men driving home. And then nothing. No calls, no witnesses. No final footprints in the snow. Just silence, as if the mountain reached out and claimed them. These men, Bill, Jack, Ted, Jack, and Gary, were creatures of habit. They didn't drink. They didn't wander. They didn't break routine. Their families could predict their evenings almost to the minute. They were the kind of sons who called home if they were running 10 minutes late. That night, they weren't just late. They never came home at all. Hours earlier, the 5 friends were laughing, energized after watching a basketball game at Chico State. They had made the drive together, something they'd done dozens of times. They bought snacks, talked excitedly about the Special Olympics tournament the next morning, and headed back toward Yuba City. This tournament wasn't just another event. It was special. They were part of a team, the Gateway Gators, and they took that responsibility seriously. Their uniforms were laid out at home. Parents stayed up late to wash them. They rehearsed every play, every drill. These were men who didn't take chances and didn't miss commitments. But when the night ended and the families waited for the sound of footsteps outside the door, the quiet felt wrong, deeply wrong. The kind of wrong that's hard to describe but impossible to ignore. Something had unraveled somewhere out there in the darkness. By sunrise, concern had turned to panic. Calls were made. Neighbors were contacted. Police were alerted. And as the cold wind rolled down from the Sierra Mountains, officers began their search. Fresh snow blanketed the forest floor. Snow that hid everything: tire tracks, footprints, dropped objects, signs of struggle. Whatever happened in the night, the mountain had already begun covering it. For hours, searchers drove every possible route between Chico and Yuba City. It should have been simple. A straight, familiar drive. No reason to stray. No reason to detour. And then came the moment that changed everything. A forest ranger called in a discovery. A lone Mercury Montego sitting on a remote mountain road, high in the Plumas National Forest. Miles from the highway. Miles from any logical route home. And 70 miles in the wrong direction. The road it sat on wasn't just isolated, it was practically abandoned in winter. Locals avoided it. Tourists didn't know about it. Even seasoned hunters used it sparingly. Yet the Montego sat there as if it had been intentionally placed, untouched, unmoving, waiting. When deputies approached, the first thing they noticed was how pristine the car looked. No dents, no scratches from brush. No mud packed into the wheel wells. Nothing to indicate it had slid off the road or gotten stuck. The doors were unlocked. Inside, maps were neatly folded. Programs from the basketball game lay on the seats. Snacks were untouched. The gas tank was almost full. The keys, however, were nowhere to be found. If the car had failed, they would have tried to start it. If they'd been scared, the doors would have been locked. If they'd been stranded, they would have rummaged through the car, left signs of stress, confusion, desperation. Instead, everything was orderly, neat, calm. It looked less like a car that had been abandoned, and more like a car that had been stepped out of intentionally, quietly, without panic. The strangest detail was revealed when mechanics inspected the vehicle later. It started perfectly, no issues, no malfunction, no reason for the men to exit. So why would 5 men voluntarily walk away from a perfectly working car into freezing wilderness in the middle of the night? With no jackets, no flashlights, and no clear destination? Investigators stood in the silent pines, staring at the empty road, knowing the first chapter of the mystery only deepened the questions. 5 men entered the mountains. The mountains refused to give them back. The discovery of the Montego should have narrowed the search. It should have given investigators a direction, a starting point, a sense of where the 5 men walked next. But instead, it did the opposite. The mountain road where the car sat, the Oroville-Quincy Road, was buried in layers of snow and isolation. No tire marks, no footprints, no debris. Only blank terrain stretching in every direction. It was as if the car had been dropped there from the sky. The first officers on scene radioed back a message that sent a chill through the families. We found the car, but we found nothing else. Nothing else. Not one sign that 5 grown men had stepped into that environment. Authorities expanded the search instantly. Snowmobiles growled through the forest. Helicopters skimmed the treetops. Volunteers slogged through wet drifts that swallowed their boots, but the weather worked against them. A storm moved in that first afternoon, dumping more snow on the ground, covering fresh tracks, silencing clues before anyone could reach them. Search dogs were brought in, but the cold confused them. They spun in circles, whined, lost whatever faint sense they'd picked up. Handlers tried again and again, but every trail ended the same way. Nothing. Inside the command center, maps were stretched across tables. Red lines marked routes the men might have taken. Blue lines marked paths search teams had already covered. But none of it made sense. There was no reason, none at all, that the five would leave the safety of the car. Especially not in a blizzard. Especially not in the dead of night. Families gathered in a small room inside the sheriff's office. They waited for updates that never came. They sat together in quiet clusters, holding cups of coffee that went cold in their hands. With every hour that passed, the weight of dread grew heavier. And then, in the middle of the chaos, something unexpected happened. A witness stepped forward. His name was Joseph Shones, a 55-year-old man who had been on the same mountain road the night the Yuba County Five vanished. He had driven up the road earlier that evening and accidentally gotten his own car stuck in the snow. While trying to free it, he experienced chest pains, a mild heart attack. He spent hours trapped in his car, drifting in and out of consciousness, cold and terrified. But Shones swore that during the night he saw something. He said he saw headlights. He said he heard voices. He said he saw a group of people, men, walking in the snow. At one point, he thought he saw a woman and a baby, but he wasn't sure. His vision was foggy, his mind slipping between panic and exhaustion. What he remembered most clearly was the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow. And the sense that someone was nearby, moving, talking, maybe even shouting. But when he called for help, the figures seemed to turn, walking away from him, disappearing into the dark. Investigators debated his story. Could he have actually seen the Yuba County Five? Or was it all a hallucination brought on by fear and pain? One fact stood out. Shones claimed he saw the Montego in the spot where police later found it, which meant the car was on that mountain road at the same time he was. But that only added more questions. If Shones was right, what were the men doing so deep in the forest? Why didn't they help him? Why were they walking? And who were the woman and child he thought he saw? Theories swirled. They were forced. They were chased. They were frightened by someone or something in the dark. Or maybe they had stumbled upon something they were never meant to see. But nothing fit perfectly. Every theory answered one question and created three more. Days turned into a week. A week turned into a month. The snow kept falling, burying evidence deeper and deeper. Eventually the formal search was called off. Not because anyone wanted to stop, but because the mountain had become too dangerous. For the families, the hardest part wasn't the silence of the forest. It was not knowing whether the men were lying injured somewhere, waiting, freezing, calling for help that would never come. And so the Sierra waited, silent, cold, unmoved. Winter would hide the truth. Spring would decide what to reveal. 4 months passed. 4 long months of families hoping, praying, bargaining with fate for answers. And then came the thaw. As the snow melted across the Sierra Nevada, hunters, hikers, and motorcyclists returned to the trails. Among them was a small group of motorcyclists exploring a remote service road. They spotted an old U.S. Forest Service trailer, the kind used in summer months by rangers, and decided to take a closer look. No one expected what they found inside. A shattered window, blankets piled high. And in the back corner, beneath layers of clothing and fabric, something still and silent. When deputies arrived and moved the blankets aside, they found the body of Ted Wire. But this discovery only deepened the mystery. Ted hadn't died immediately after the disappearance. Far from it. He had survived for weeks, possibly as long as 2 full months. His beard was grown out. His weight had dropped dramatically. But he hadn't starved because food wasn't available. Far from it. Inside the trailer were stores of canned food, enough to feed all 5 men. But most of it was untouched. Investigators found open cans in the shed nearby, meaning someone had broken in to access supplies. But inside the trailer, where the food was safer and warmer, nothing had been eaten. There were matches, books, even furniture that could be burned. Yet no fire had ever been lit. The trailer was freezing. The cold inside was brutal. And Ted, already weak, would have suffered every hour he remained there. But the most chilling detail was this. Ted's feet showed signs of severe frostbite and infection. He likely couldn't walk, which meant someone had helped him. Someone had carried him, someone had wrapped him in blankets. Ted did not die alone initially. He had help. He had companionship. Someone stayed with him, until they didn't. But who was with him, and where did that person go? Investigators found no clothing, no footprints, no additional bodies near the trailer. Then, a mile and a half up the mountain, they found something else. 2 bodies lying on opposite sides of the road. Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga. Animals had scattered their bones, but their general locations told a story. They had likely collapsed from exhaustion and exposure, trying to walk back toward the car. A few days later, they found the remains of Jack Hoot, several miles away in a different direction. 4 men accounted for. 1 left unaccounted. Gary Mathias, the only one of the 5 whose body was never recovered. And then came the most unsettling clue. Inside the trailer, investigators found a pair of Gary's shoes, but they were not where they should have been. They were being worn by someone else. Gary's heavier, sturdier shoes were missing. The implication was chilling. Gary may have left the trailer, alive, walking, somewhere into the forest. The Sierra was done giving up bodies, but not done giving up questions. Why did 5 men travel 19 miles on foot, uphill, through snow, in the dark, when they had a perfectly working car? Why didn't they build a fire? Why didn't they eat the food? Why did some stay behind while others wandered miles away? And most importantly, where did Gary go? By the time all remains were found, except Gary's, the case had left investigators with more unanswered questions than answers. Theories rose. Theories collapsed. New ones emerged. And each one was stranger than the last. One of the earliest theories suggested the men simply got lost, but that made no sense. The road they needed to take home was simple, straightforward, familiar. They'd driven it countless times. The route to the mountains, on the other hand, required deliberate turns, long detours, and conscious choices. Not one accidental wrong turn, several. Another theory proposed that they were fleeing something. Maybe someone had chased them. Maybe they felt in danger. Maybe they ran, but there were no signs of panic inside the car. No one had slammed doors. No one had rummaged through the glove box or trunk. Nothing was overturned. Nothing was frantic. If they fled, they did it calmly, too calmly. Then came the theory that focused on Gary Mathias, who lived with schizophrenia but was stable and medicated. Some speculated he had an episode and convinced the others to follow him deeper into the mountains. But this theory fell apart under scrutiny. Gary had been stable for years. He loved the group. And even if he had suffered an episode, the others wouldn't have blindly marched miles into snow and darkness. The strongest theory, the one that disturbs people the most, is the idea that the men encountered someone on the mountain road. Someone who tricked them. Someone who led them off course. Someone who convinced them to leave the car. If that theory is true, it could explain the calmness of the scene. If they trusted this person, they wouldn't have panicked. Some investigators circle back to Joseph Schoen's testimony. The headlights he saw, the voices, the figures walking in the snow, the possible woman and child. Who were they? Why were they never found? Were they real or hallucinations? Or were they something else entirely, something connected to the disappearance? Theories went darker from there. Some believe the men witnessed something illegal on that mountain road, a drug drop, a hidden operation, something secretive, and were silenced. Others believe they were threatened and fled blindly into the forest. There are even theories of paradoxical undressing, group hysteria, shared psychosis, but none fit all the facts. And even stranger, none explain why Gary Mathias was never found. Search teams combed every inch of the area, every ravine, every creek, every tree line. If Gary had died near the others, his body would have surfaced during the thaw, but it didn't. No clothing, no bones, no shoes, nothing. The forest swallowed him whole. Or he walked out of it alive. Some believe Gary found a road, caught a ride, and fled the area, living under a new identity. Others believe he succumbed to the cold miles from where anyone searched. But the cold reality is this: his disappearance is now one of the longest-standing missing person mysteries in California. And the story refuses to settle. The Yuba County Five are often compared to the Dyatlov Pass incident. 2 tragedies separated by continents, but bound by the same haunting truth. Sometimes what happens in the wilderness stays there. 47 years later, the mountain keeps its silence. It keeps its secrets. It keeps its dead. And somewhere out there, beneath layers of pine and earth and mystery, lies the truth of what happened on that frozen night. Until then, the story of the Yuba County Five remains what it has always been: a cold echo, a splintered trail, a puzzle missing its final most important piece. Thank you for watching Dark True Crime Archives, where the untold stays remembered.